So court rules. Court rules essentially direct how cases are going to be handled. And there are rules for almost everything. There are rules of civil procedure, criminal procedure, even if you have a case before the local magistrate. There are rules that govern magistrates. There are rules that govern specifically for our Supreme Court of Appeals. There are rules of evidence. Whatever exists at the federal level, there's usually something comparable at the state level in terms of court rules. They are your bread and butter. Okay? Yes, attorneys get punished for violating rules. Attorneys occasionally get disbarred for violating rules. Follow the rules. In addition to the regular rules, courts may have local rules. And the local rules usually describe specific procedures before the courts. Briefs must be filed on 8.5 by 11 white paper. And if you go in with legal size, they might not take it. Or the hours for the court. When I was in practice in Bedford, Huntingdon County was next door. And Huntingdon County had a local rule that said that the county courthouse closed at noon on Wednesdays. And that sounds odd, but the reason why was because they were open from 9 to noon on Saturdays, and they wanted to give their employees some time off. And an out-of-town attorney didn't check the local rules. And he showed up on a Wednesday afternoon to file papers. And the courthouse was closed. And he showed up the next day, and he said, I'm here to file these. They said, yesterday was your last day, and we closed at noon. Sorry. You didn't check the local rules. Now, he got lucky. He appealed that. He fought it the whole way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Superior Court sided with the local rules. And the Supreme Court said no. In this day and age, people should expect that the courthouse is going to be open during regular business hours on a weekday. So they let him file. But even though he didn't commit malpractice as a result, all the work he did on that, his client wasn't paying for him to appeal that decision. That was his mistake. That was on his dime. Okay? You do not impress the firm if you wind up doing something like that. So pay attention to the rules, both the regular rules and the local rules. And remember, you may be dealing with multiple sets of rules. It can be a civil case, but if you're dealing with evidence coming in, you're looking at the rules of evidence. So pay attention. At the federal level, the federal courts have been given the power to make their own rules. The U.S. Supreme Court is the one who promulgates the general rules for all the federal courts, except for the local rules. State court rules will vary depending on the state. In some cases, the legislature promulgates the rules. In some cases, it's the judiciary. Sometimes it's a combination. Sometimes it's a committee that's created between the two that works on them. So it will vary. In West Virginia, according to our Constitution, Article 8, Section 3, the Supreme Court of Appeals has power to promulgate rules for all cases and proceedings. Okay, and those rules, notice the last line of that, shall have the force and effect of law. That's the reason I said you can get into trouble if you're not following the rules. Pay attention to these. Federal court rules, okay, you know these. Civil procedure, criminal procedure, evidence. The bankruptcy courts have their own rules. The courts of appeals have their own rules of appellate procedure. The Supreme Court has its own rules, and a bunch of others. If you are after federal annotated rules, and remember, it is annotated, it's not anointed. We had a pro se patron when I was back at Dickinson who came in the law library one time, asked to see the anointed books. I said, we could have Father Minetti come over, say a prayer, sprinkle a little holy water. He didn't see the humor in that. So if you're using United States Code annotated, all the rules are at Title 28, with one exception, the rules of criminal procedure are in Title 18. They're going to have things like historical notes. You know, it's amazing how a very short rule can sometimes cause so much controversy, and there can be multiple cases, and sometimes you have to go back and find what the reasoning was. It's like doing a legislative history. You have to check the historical notes to find out the reason for the rule being adopted. One other thing the United States Code Annotated has, and if you wind up doing federal work, I'm going to tell you now, get a hold of the volume in print and photocopy these pages. If you go to the very beginning of the Rules of Civil Procedure, they have a timetable. Here, you can pass that. And it tells you exactly when you need to file according to the rules, what the timeline is, what rule governs. If you're doing federal work, trust me, this is not created by the courts. This is something that Wes put together, but it's damn good. Photocopy that, keep it by your desk, because it makes it real easy to look up when something's due and what rule is governing.
Where is it?
It's right at the very beginning, right after Rule 1 in the Rules of Civil Procedure. Or if you go online, I tell you, if you go on Westlaw, you will find the same thing. You will not find it on Lexis, because this was created by the editors at West. And USCA is available on Westlaw. Lexis has its own version. Of course, that's USCS, United States Code Service. The rules there are not in the main body of the set. You know, we said Title 28 and Title 18 for USCA. USCS, the rules are in separate volumes that sit the whole way at the end of the set. You just mark court rules. It doesn't matter. If you're searching them online, you're going to go into legislation and court rules and you'll find them. Going to have much the same thing now. Case annotations. Remember, the cases that are selected may vary. If you have the option of using both Lexis and Westlaw, sometimes it never hurts to take a quick look after you found something on one of them. Take a look at the other, because the editors may have picked different cases, and you might find something that supports what you're saying that is going to be in the other set. Unannotated rules, well, the United States Code, but nobody uses. I know it's official. I know you're supposed to cite to it. We blow the dust off the United States Code every now and then because nobody ever looks at it. But the rules are, just like USCA, they're going to be in Title 28 or Title 18. By the way, you will find that certain states will do that. West Virginia, our state rules are in the Rules of Court volume. But depending on the state, you have to get used to it. For example, in Pennsylvania, all the rules are in Title 42, with one exception. The Rules of Orphans Court are in Title 28. Makes no sense, but that's the way they've done it. And trust me, people who aren't used to it sometimes do not find the Rules of Orphans Court, and they screw up as a result, because they couldn't find the things. So be aware if you wind up working in two different states, you know, or if you're working outside of West Virginia, know where the rules are. It's going to vary a little bit. Again, these rules, the unannotated rules, are also going to be on Bloomberg or the federal digital system. Within the West Virginia statutes, either the West Virginia statutes or Mickey's West Virginia statutes, there are volumes that are marked Federal court rules. Why are there federal court rules in the state statutes? Well, because there are attorneys out there that do all federal work. And these have not only the rules of civil procedure, criminal procedure, appellate procedure, these have the local rules for the Fourth Circuit and the local rules for the Northern and Southern District. So if you need any of the local rules for federal courts, they're going to be in here. And those sit near the end of either Mickey's or Wes. There's an index at the end of each set of the rules, if you're using them in print. And by the way, if you're going to be doing courtroom work, you're probably going to have extra copies of this at the firm, and you're going to take that into court, because the last thing you want to do is to have to hop online and look something up in the middle of the case. You want to just be able to pick the book up and flip through to the rules, and you're probably going to have it tabbed accordingly. But at the end of each set of rules in here, there's an index that covers that particular set of rules. Okay, if you're doing federal work, as I said, sometimes rules become very controversial. I think if you look at the one volume that I passed around earlier, it starts with Rule 1. There are a handful of rules in that volume, and the whole rest of that are case annotations. That tells you how often these things get litigated. Two places that you might want to check for background material on the federal rules. The first is a critter called Federal Practice and Procedure. Nobody calls it that. If you ever hear the term Wright and Miller, that is a reference to Federal Practice and Procedure. Even though Wright and Miller only wrote part of it, we just ignore the other authors, and so they get forgotten. The other one is Moore's Federal Practice. Federal Practice and Procedure, Wright and Miller, is going to be available on Westlaw. Moore's Federal Practice is going to be available on Lexis. They're both tabbed directly with the federal rules. So you can look up your rule in there, and it will explain all about the rule and any issues that have come up under that particular rule. Here's what Moore's looks like. It's a loose leaf. By the way, anytime you're using a loose leaf publication, you always want to check the very first volume and see when it was last updated. If that loose leaf was last updated in 1993, you put it back on the shelf, you pretend you didn't see it. Okay? If you use that, it's outdated, it just hasn't been updated. If you use it, that's legal malpractice. Okay, one-way ticket to New Jersey, that's bad. Except they do make good taffy down there. So. West Virginia, we have a bunch of rules as well. Rules of civil procedure, criminal procedure. There's usually something comparable. Of course, we don't have the rules of for the courts of appeals, because we don't have courts of appeals here. We skip that intermediate level, and we appeal directly from the trial courts up to the Supreme Court. But magistrate courts all have their own rules. Even the family court has its own rules. I already passed around the volumes for the federal rules. There are also state court rules volumes in both Mickey's and West. The difference between these and the federal rules volumes is these are annotated. The federal rules volumes are not annotated. If you want to see the case annotations that deal with those rules, go to USCA or USCS or online on Lexis or Westlaw. Okay? But the print volumes for the federal rules are not annotated. These volumes are. So if you want to see how our courts have dealt with our rules. And these are all available on Lexis and Westlaw. I know, I'm the dinosaur that still uses them in print. But trust me, when you go into court, you're going to take this volume with you. And you're going to have it tabbed so you know exactly where to flip to when someone objects to something and you need to look a rule up real quick. Unannotated rules, you can get to the judiciary website, and this will be posted online. So, local rules. In West Virginia, we do have a set called the trial court rules. And the whole idea of the trial court rules was that they were to regulate matters covered by local rules. But in the trial court rules, they say that, yeah, the trial courts can still adopt local rules. Now, it's going to vary from state to state in terms of local rules. In Pennsylvania, where I practiced, we actually had 3 rules of court volumes with our state statutes, and volume 3 was local rules. So if you wanted to see local rules for Dauphin County, Cumberland County, Allegheny County, you just went to that volume and looked them up. We do not have that here in West Virginia. So local rules, your firm will know what the local rules are. They'll get posted at the courthouse if there are any changes in the local rules. I don't think we have the numbers of local rules down here that we did in Pennsylvania. But the courts do have the power to adopt them. My little sweetheart. She's managed to bring down 6 sets of curtains thus far. If you need help with legislative history, come find me, and I will walk you through it. Okay. The whole idea of legislative history, we're looking at the documents that are created during the step of the enactment of a law. Things like House reports, Senate reports, what are called committee prints. Someday my prints will come. Anyway, which prints are just all the work that's prepared in creating the reports. Floor debate, hearings, Congressional Reference Service reports. CRS, or Congressional Reference Services, a department of the Library of Congress. And if the representative wants research done on a particular topic, they call the CRS, and CRS will put together a report on that. By the way, if any of you are ever writing for law review, take a look for CRS reports, because if you can find a CRS report on point, someone has done one heck of a lot of your work for you. So definitely take advantage of those. Why would you want to research it? Well, there's little or no case law available. Maybe this law was just recently enacted and it just hasn't made it into the judicial system yet. Or it's been in the judicial system, but the case law isn't on point. What you are going to find when you are in practice, Mark is not making this up. If you want the court to say this, the judge is going to write something that goes the whole way around what you want the person to say, that he or she isn't going to say it. They're very good at doing that. So it's out there, but it's not on point, or there are just ambiguities in the language of the law. And you would think as many lawyers as look these over before they get enacted, that wouldn't be the case, but it is. Okay, so what are we looking at? Well, first of all, House, Senate, and Conference Committee reports. Again, this will all be posted online. The only ones of these that you have to worry about for legislative history purposes are number 1, reports that accompany a legislative measure, and number 3, reports of conference committees. The other ones, yeah, those are reports that they deal with, but they really have nothing to do with legislative history. Those are more oversight reports. Committee prints, again, draft reports, directories, statistics that were gathered in when a bill's going through hearings, studies. All of that stuff comes in what is called the committee prints. Okay? They don't have the weight of a report, but sometimes if you have certain questions, you might have to get in and start looking at the committee prints as well. Hearings. And again, you know, I listed all the types of hearings that Congress does, but legislative hearings are what we're talking about in terms of legislative history. And for hearings, Congress will bring noted experts in to testify on a particular bill, like Warren Buffett, or Bill Gates, or Muhammad Ali and Michael J. Fox, who testified on Parkinson's disease. Oops. Or Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers had one of the most important hearings in congressional history. He saved public television. And he went up and he sang a song from his show to Congress. And the senator afterwards said, Mr. Rogers, you just earned X million dollars for public TV. Or Joel, who testified on homelessness in America. Or Sheryl Crow, who talked about breast cancer. Or Sir Elton John, talked about AIDS research in Africa. This was a very controversial. A lot of congressmen objected to this hearing. And the only non-human to ever testify before Congress was Elmo. Now, I hate to tell you, but for hearings, we don't give a lot of weight to Warren Buffett probably gets a good bit of weight. Elmo is not going to get a whole lot of weight. I'm sorry. He testified on music in schools. House and Senate reports. What happens is the committee has hearings, then they prepare a report. If they recommend that the bill go to the floor of the House, that report accompanies the bill. If the House approves the bill, then that report becomes the House report. Then it goes over to the Senate, and the same thing happens all over again. So there could be a House report and a Senate report. Reports are numbered, so if you see House Report 104, it's always the session of Congress, and they're just numbered in order of adoption. Floor debate, you can go to the congressional record for floor debate. Congressional record, by the way, not on the Senate side, but on the House side, representatives can actually say things they never said. Where it says that additional remarks, they can have stuff put in that they actually never said. So, conference committee reports. If there's a difference between a bill adopted by the House and a bill adopted by the Senate, it goes to a conference committee. The conference committee does the same thing. They research the bill. They try to iron out the differences between the House and the Senate, and they come up with a conference committee report. Once a bill has been passed by a conference committee, it goes directly to the floor for a vote. It is no longer open to amendment. So once it's through the conference committee, that's all done. It's an up or down vote. It either gets approved or it does not get approved. Presidential signing statements. In the old days, the president would sign and the president would say, well, I like this bill, I think it fulfills an important gap, or today, the president gets up and says, well, I think that parts of this are unconstitutional and we're not going to enforce them. But sometimes the signing statement is important because of that. They've explained why they are or are not going to enforce certain provisions. By the way, signing statements, you hear a lot on talk radio as if these are just brand new things. They're not. Signing statements go back to 1822 with President Monroe. And I think President Monroe knew a fair amount about the Constitution, so. Weight of authority. Conference committee reports, then House, then Senate, and Senate reports are given the most weight. Usually between the House and Senate reports, if the bill began in the House, we usually give that report a little more weight. But they're all given a good bit of weight. Floor debate, if it's statements by the sponsor of the bill, we give that a good bit of weight. Otherwise, particularly if it's an opponent of the bill, they're just standing up and speaking for the press. We don't give that very much weight. And hearings, I'm sorry, Elmo, but we're not going to give what you had to say a whole lot of weight. So where do we find these? Hein Online has a lot of legislative history. Does everyone know how to get into Hein Online? Yes, okay. Yeah, just from the library webpage, click on Hide Online under Quick Links to Popular Databases. The Federal Legislative History Title Collection has legislation going back from 1909 to date. The others are getting into compiled legislative histories. Nancy Johnson put together a sources of compiled legislative histories. At one time, legislative histories really were not made public. The Library of Congress kept a copy, but they didn't distribute them to other libraries, and they certainly weren't online. And in the early days, the Wall Street Journal actually used to print a lot of these reports when they would be issued, because that was the only way they could be made public. A lot of law reviews, like if you go back to the early copies of Yale and Harvard Law Review, you will see that they tended to print a lot of these reports. So that's a way to get into that older material that you're probably, I doubt if any of you are going to be doing a legislative history on the Pure Food and Drug Act or anything. Although that would be a fun one to do. But the Congressional Documents Library, the Congressional Record is there, congressional hearings going way back are there, Congressional Research Service is there, committee prints are there. The Presidential Library has the compilation of presidential documents and public papers of the presidents. If you go to ProQuest, this is the ultimate place to do legislative history research. If I had to recommend one place for you to begin your research, ProQuest. And you can get into it the same way that you would get into Hein Online. Just go to the Law Library webpage, that list of databases that comes up, and you will see, I think it's the very last one on the list. I think Hein Online is first, and then Lexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg, and then ProQuest. ProQuest includes something called Legislative Insight. And if you get into Legislative Insight, you can just pick a public law, and it will tell you every bit of legislative history that they have available online. And they go way back. They also have the Congressional Research Service documents. So if you want to see one of those reports, you can just click on that. And I know we're running out of time, and I know you all need lunch. So if you want to see this, please come see me. And I'll walk you through it in my office. You stand. The Fun and Happy Book with the very long name. Goes back to 1948. Selectively reprints presidential signing statements and congressional reports. Available on Westlaw. Govinfo.gov has a bunch of this stuff. I don't like govinfo.gov. There was one called Federal Digital System before this, and I like that one much better. I think govinfo.gov is confusing. Congress.gov used to be called Thomas.gov after Thomas Jefferson, and then the Republicans got a hold of Congress and they changed the name. So it's so sad when stuff like that happens. But one nice thing, if you're doing historical research, anyone's going to be writing for law review, the whole way from 1774 to 1917, they have all the congressional reports and everything available for free through Congress.gov. The House and Senate web pages have some material. Westlaw has some. Lexis is very weak in legislative history. You know why? That wonderful set that I said was Legislative Insight, guess who developed it? That was Lexis. And they sold it to ProQuest. So they had the best legislative history, and then they sold it off. But even Google Scholar has some material. Okay. Any questions on any of this? I know I'm going to get home tonight and open the door, and this guy's going to charge out into the driveway, and then I'm going to spend a half an hour trying to catch him. So my indoor cat, who loves it outside. Any questions on any of this? Okay, go eat lunch. Thank you all for coming to this. We really appreciate it. I hope you're finding this to be helpful.
This is incredibly helpful.